Hello, everybody. I am going to be reading a series that is 12 chapters long. Woo! I have been given permission to read this series by LitaCakes. Correct me if I'm saying that wrong. I butcher names all the time. I will be reading Seen and Not Heard by LitaCakes. Reader ADHD_God. The summary: Where have you been? Inko Midoriya's voice screamed from down the hall. Izuku had just closed the door behind himself. He hadn't even taken off his shoes yet. Answer me, child. After he turned 4, his parents never used his name anymore. He was boy or child, never Izuku. But one more thing that's just one more thing Izuku just didn't understand. He knew there was an answer when he was given a direct order, but it was hard to face. It was hard to force his throat to unlatch so he could speak. I'm sorry, Okaasan. The teachers requested me to help clean after school. He learned to lie at a very young age, so hopefully if he told her he was walking slowly, she'd make it hurt him more. It was easier just to tell her something he made up in her head. Hopefully she didn't try to verify the information he gave her. Regardless of the lie, Inko walked over and laid a slap across Izuku's cheek. He barely flinched, keeping his eyes on the floor, on the ground between them. This one, trigger warnings: there is abuse, neglect, physical injury, burns, lying, and if any of that triggers you, go listen to something else. Because, no, this is not for you, and depressing. It's sad, but happy. And then he gets happy, so, it's gonna, fun. Okay. Chapter 1. My origins are found in blood and burns. Izuku never understood why everybody at school was so excited to go home at the end of the day. Staying in school sounded like a much better idea to him. At school he could learn, he could really have awesome lunches. They had coloring books and crayons. He didn't get any of that at home. He wasn't even allowed to ask why either. Though lately his teachers have stopped trying to make him interact with other kids. Some of the kids even whispered behind his back. Katsuki even being distant recently. Though Izuku never stopped acting like he always did around the explosive blonde. Today, however, was the first time he noted a real difference between them. Today, Katsuki, Izuku's Kachan, had used his quirk on Izuku. Izuku had a bright red itchy mark on the left of his arm. It was painful, but his teachers had told him to leave it alone when he tried to scratch it. They didn't even give him a band-aid. One even scolded him for provoking Katsuki. Izuku wasn't sure what provoking meant, though. The bell rang, and Katsuki ran out ahead of everybody, and Izuku watched as Auntie Mitsuki picked him up in her arms and carried him off down the streets. Izuku's parents never picked him up. Sometimes Auntie Mitsuki would walk him home while carrying Katsuki, maybe, But maybe Katsuki didn't want to walk home together today. Izuku understand. His mom was nice. Auntie was so amazing and sweet. He could understand why Katsuki keeps his mom all to himself sometimes. Izuku tugs at his shoes and slowly starts to walk home. It wasn't a long walk. He only had a few big roads to cross. He walked at a slow pace, trying to make his walk long as humanly possible. So he wouldn't have to go back to his apartment. To his parents, the memories of their voices shouting at him that made him twitch. It almost fell off the curb walking, taking a deep breath. Izuku leaned on the fence and tried to calm himself down. Get in the closet! Shut up! Don't you dare show your face in my kitchen! What do you want, child? Izuku shook his head, trying to escape their voices. Everything hurt. He didn't know why. He couldn't explain why his chest felt like an elephant was sitting on it. Izuku couldn't understand why the words made his chest scream or his ears ring. It felt all too much, like his whole body was overflowing, and he didn't have any buckets to catch the water, all the water. By the time he finally calmed down, he crumpled a large fist of fabric from his uniform in his hand. She'd be angry, but Izuku didn't have the energy to care today. He could deal with it. He just needed to breathe, to calm down. Eventually, his feet start to move again. Where the hell have you been? Inko Midoriya's voice screamed down the hall. Izuku had just closed the door behind himself and hadn't even taken off his shoes yet. Answer me, child! After he turned 4, his parents never used his name anymore. He was child or boy, never Izuku. But one more thing Izuku didn't understand. He knew there was an answer when given the direct orders, but it was so hard to force his throat to unhinge so he could speak. I'm sorry, Ono-san. The teachers requested me to clean up after school. He learned to lie at a very young age. If he told her he was walking slowly, she'd make him hurt more. It was easier to tell her something he made up in his head. Hopefully, she didn't try to verify the information he gave her. Regardless of the lie, Inko walked over and laid a vigorous slap across Izuku's cheek. He barely flinched, keeping his eyes open, keeping his eyes on the ground between them. You are to come directly home after school. Get situated. His parents would call that every time he came home. He knew it was so the neighbors didn't hear the truth. He was starting to understand, even though if he didn't really know what it meant. He didn't have the words for what he felt. He didn't have the words for what his parents did. Izuku took off his shoes and set them nearby in his spot. Behind the door, out of the way, above a small hook, which was with a nondiscreet book bag. He took the bag down. And tugged a large leather muzzle his parents made him wear whenever he was in the house. It was a recent addition to his daily routine. only having been put in it since his 8th birthday. In fact, it was his birthday present. Izuku wrapped the device around his head and turned back to Inko. Letting her strap on Elite and latch it, she locked the device with a key she's always kept and she always wore around her wrist, only unlocking it when he left school each morning. No one ever asked why Izuku had little lines on his face. That usually faded by lunchtime. Once the muzzle was in place, Izuku took a pair of gloves from the bag and put them on, along with a fresh pair of socks that were shut out by the door each morning. He wasn't allowed to wear dirty socks in the house when he came home. He wasn't even allowed to touch anything with his bare hands. Izuku was not allowed to speak. Izuku was not allowed to exit. Izuku was quirkless. He was worthless. He was supposed to be invisible. Izuku was not supposed to be seen and not heard. Better yet, neither. Or better yet, neither. Go, Izuku. Inko ordered. Izuku obeyed, carrying himself with particular strength through the apartment towards his bedroom. The room itself was a spare, only with a desk for him to do his schoolwork and a chair for the desk and a bed. All of his clothing fit in the closet. He owned only school uniforms and 3 sets of clothing when he wasn't at school. He quickly changed out of his uniform and set it into the laundry basket right outside the door. Izuku washed his uniform every day. She refused to let his quirkless germs remain in her house longer than necessary. Finding his favorite outfit, a loose t-shirt, some comfy sweatpants, Izuku curled up on his bed with the only comfort item he had. It was a small blanket that had a hero on it. Inko bought it on his 3rd birthday when he told her he wanted to be a hero. It had All Might, Crimson Riot, Eraserhead, and Present Mike. There were about 15 other heroes on the blanket, but those were his favorites. The spot with his favorites were very worn from his hands rubbing and fiddling with the blanket to soothe himself through rough nights. The front door clattered open and slamming shut. Izuku raised his head in his chest, so loud that he thought it might give his position away. So he shuffled off the bed and tucked himself beneath it, burying himself way against the wall. Tonight would be a rough night. When Hazashi would come home loudly, it was always a rough night. He tried not to panic. If he stayed quiet and didn't try to find any dinner, then Hazashi would usually forget he existed, and didn't bother Izuku. Of course the universe must have hated Izuku today, because it wasn't enough that Katsuki burned him today. Hazashi came rifling in through Izuku's door like a herd of cattle. Izuku breathing picked up. He was scared if Hazashi might hear him. He quickly clamped both his hands over his muzzle to try to soften the sound. Inko! Where is the boy? In his room. Where do you think? Why do you want that germy nauseating anyway? Inko shouted across the room. Nuisance anyway, Inko shouted across the room. Izuku wondered sometimes how none of their neighbors complained about noise. Maybe his parents had put something in the walls to prevent the others from hearing? Well, I don't see him. Boy, get out here now. If you don't, I'll make it 10 times worse. Izuku knew better than to not deny that tone of voice. He crawled out from under his bed, hiding his comfort blanket at the back of the darkest space. A bruise, a bitter smell hit Izuku's nose. A burst of bitter smell hit Izuku's nose. Hisashi had been drinking again. Hopefully, this time Izuku wouldn't end up with faced pieces of glass in his arm or head before he even got fully under the bed. Out from under the bed. Hisashi grabbed him by the collar and yanked him to his feet. In the back of his legs scrambled to the back to his legs, scrambled from the bed frame. Izuku cried out in pain, muffled against the muzzle on his face. You want to complain? Hisashi smacked him. Thankfully, the muzzle took most of the hit, saved Izuku would likely have been a bruise. But then Hisashi was back again, grabbing the muzzle and yanking it roughly. Again, he knew better to speak and ask directly. Even with the muzzle removed, he knew what was coming. He didn't even think he had the strength to keep quiet this time. It hurt too much. What have you got to complain about, boy? Answer me. Tears finally started to freely stream down Izuku's face. He couldn't hold them back anymore. Usually, it was easy. It just took the hits. He would just take the hits. Keep quiet. And in the morning, he could go back to school, be away from these people for a few hours every day. He held out those few hours of freedom. Of life without shouting and pain. But today, that changed. Today, he was finally treated like that at school. So when Hisashi answered him demanded him to answer the same question he asked every time he drank, Izuku couldn't shut his mouth. Why do you all hate me so much? He screamed, confused and pain ripping through his voice. Hisashi froze. Izuku shocked. Izuku had even produced sound that large. He hadn't spoken above a mumble since he's gotten the muzzle last year. He wasn't allowed to. Even when he was ordered to speak, instantly he knew he messed up. He messed up so bad. His hands tugged tightly at his muzzle, trying to put it back on his mouth. It was useless. Hisashi had already yanked it down past his chin without unlocking it. He couldn't slip it back on. His face was red and scratched up for where Hisashi has yanked it. He couldn't feel it. All Izuku could feel was terror. Hisashi was silent. Deathly so. This was bad. Very, very bad. What did you say, boy? Izuku froze at the man's arms. In the man's arms. A single shaky breath betraying his panic. Do you think you deserve our love when you're nothing but a waste of space, money, air, time, energy? Do you think a worthless piece of null garbage null garbage like you gets any right to anything but disgust and complaint? Izuku whimpers, trying desperately to break free from Hazashi's hands, but it was nothing he could do. He was too small, too weak, too useless, smoke pouring out of Hazashi's mouth. His lips paired with an angry sneer. Izuku was in danger of serious pain. He couldn't get free. Why should he even try? Maybe Hazashi was right. Maybe he didn't deserve anything that happened to him. Maybe he did deserve everything that happened to him. Maybe he was just worthless. Hazashi brought his gloves to his mouth, and flames erupted on the side of Izuku's face, warming the skin, but not burning him yet. The fire was directed at the man's glow. He knew that he wore support gear. They worked with his quirk, but he never knew he was allowed to heat up. He could heat up and allow Hazashi to use his hands as a fire weapon. A weapon he was now going to turn on Izuku. When the gloves were almost glowing orange, Hazashi's dark red eyes stared at Izuku with obvious glee, with devilish glee. Izuku never hated the color red so much in his life. After a split second of staring at each other, Izuku with fear in his eyes and Hazashi with untamed excitement. Izuku's vision went white. He screamed with wild agony, Sasashi's palm cusping his left side of his face, half covering his mouth. The pain got worse and worse, but it never dulled. Izuku knew that Hazashi had done that on purpose, he's giving Izuku a mild burn so it would hurt worse. A mild burn so he would hurt worse. He had given Izuku a few nasty burns over the few years, but when they were too deep or too hot, it killed his nerves and Izuku's pain. It wouldn't last long, of course. That didn't give Hazashi an achievement, so any entertainment, so Izuku assumed. Inko came into the room, slamming against the bedroom door. "What are you doing, Hazashi? Stop it! You'll kill the child." Izuku knew it wasn't concerned for his well-being. No. It was concerned about getting caught for seeing the ugly monster that they were when they haunted Izuku's dream. Inko's hands were grabbing Izuku, pulling the two apart. Izuku collapsed on the floor, cuddling his seared face that was so hot. He couldn't even touch his own skin. His muzzle had gotten in the crossfire's quirk and burnt off his neck, which was bleeding, of course. He had likely blamed Inko for buying a new one. Be blamed for Inko having to buy a new one. "Get out!" Someone was knocking on the front door. "Get out and never come back. If they do, they'll arrest you. You're already a wanted man. I don't want to deal with this bullshit. You're a useless woman. I should have left you years ago. You just wanted government money. You just wanted the government's money we get for having a worthless null in the house, bitch." Hazashi stormed out of the room. Izuku didn't have much in the way of memory as what happened next. It was a blur. There was Inko. It was a blur. There was Inko, fearing with anger and worry. Maybe he saw a few colors of paradinks, a jacket or something? Paramedics? A jacket or something? Lots of people talking. Inko crying. Reading. Action. Reading. Acting. Crying. And saying her husband came home drunk and attacked her son. Her son. Izuku hasn't heard those words in years. Somebody tried to talk and ask Izuku a few questions. Izuku only needed one quick glance at her to know he wasn't allowed to speak. She explained that he was nonverbal and stinky. It's sickly. And sickly. They asked him a few yes or no questions, which Izuku either nodded or shook his head. Inko seemed satisfied with his responses. Darkness enveloped Izuku as he crawled back from under his bed, which the house has usually quieted down again. He heard the floating promises of the police officers. They'd catch her husband. He would answer for his crimes. The child should see a doctor in the morning. He shouldn't have to go back to school, the same school, in case his father came back. Izuku closed his eyes and wrapped himself around his hero blanket. In his hero blanket, he wished he could go to sleep and never wake up. But that's not how sleep works, right? Izuku knew, but for some reason, that thought wouldn't leave his mind. He just wanted to sleep forever and forget this reality. Izuku woke up to the sound of somebody kicking his bed frame. Get up! Inko's voice was seething. Get up out here now! Izuku hid under his blanket again and shouted and crawled out from under his bed. This time, no one grabbed him. He stood before Inko while keeping his eyes on the floor. He was so sore. Everything was sore. Most was from sleeping out under a cramped bed, but his face was throbbing and seething. It itched beyond relief, just like Izuku's arm. Just like his arm, Izuku had forced himself to resist the scratching it. There's a first aid on the table. Clean your burn every day and replace the bandages. You know if that gets infected, you'll only cost me more money. Wear a face mask when you leave the house from now on. You will be telling everybody you got diagnosed with a lung disorder, and you have to wear it because you're sickly and weak. I will send a note today so the teachers don't ask questions. Inko was very good at giving direct orders. She always has been. Izuku nodded at the end of each direction, as always. You are never to speak about the wound or show anybody the scar. It will surely make the new muzzle there would be a new muzzle by the time he got home today. However, it would. If you behave at home and keep your mouth shut, you can keep it off until the heel burns. Burn heals. This isn't a reward. I don't feel like risking it getting infected. If you fail the rules, you will be punished. Do I make myself clear? Answer me. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Izuku answered immediately, his voice broken and raspy. Might have been only a shot of relief because Inko didn't want any more medical bills. But even so, It was a relief to not wear the muzzle just for a little bit. Get ready, you're late for school. The deal... If you're late for school, the deal breaks. Izuku hurried off to the bathroom. As Inko left the room, his stomach growled angry as he shoved he showered and got dressed, begging for food so as he wasn't punished. He shouldn't find the usual oatmeal bowl on the table. He was slightly stuffed when he came a fresh uniform sitting in the first plate and a handwritten notice alongside it with medical tape. Fabric, not the disposable fabric kind. It was a dark green that matched his hair. It would sell the act. Izuku knew that. Quickly, he set off to peeling the bandage that the paramedics had put on the face last night. He realized just how much painfuler the burn was on his fingers, inched the tape a tiny bit. His lips almost felt like they were glued together how much thick medical cream was put on. Izuku was careful and damped it off and cleaned the surface of his skin. He reapplied burn cream that Inko had left out for him. Lastly, a fresh bandage and a fabric mask over top of it. It was mostly to hide the scar. There was issues. If it didn't hide the bottom that would peek out behind his neck. Izuku looked around, finding Inko cooking in the kitchen. He wasn't allowed to be in the kitchen. Walking over the entry of the room, he knocked lightly on the doorway. "What?" she asked, her tone unsettling. Izuku tilted his head backwards and pointed at his neck. He waited. Inko took the moment to sit down with her cooking utensils and look over at what Izuku was showing her. All she said while wiping her hands on a towel and shoving him out of the kitchen as she left the kitchen. Izuku seemed steady by himself and waited by the door. He had already tidied up the medical supplies and left an empty oatmeal bar by the bowl. In the bin on the counter, there was a request required to hear. She came and gave what it looked like a scarf, but it was loose. It was a solid loop, and it put over her head. It's called an infinity scarf. Now you have to use it from now on. I'll look into get something more permanent. Izuku bowed his head and scurried towards the door. Once the teachers had read Inko's note, Izuku was given one weaving look as he waved into the classroom. None of the students asked why he was wearing a mask and a scarf, or why he was allowed to, since it wasn't part of the uniform. He was left alone for that day. No one spoke to him, and the teachers never called on him. He was given a color book and crayons at lunch, and told to sit quietly. In the afternoon, he colored, so he did. He did hear a few whispers about from the other students as they passed his table. The table he was now made to sit at alone, since the teacher said since he was sick. He had to sit by himself so he wouldn't get any more ill. The strongest student who had their immune system injured might be weak too. He hated the idea of people thinking he was weak, that he could just die from breathing somebody else's air, but he didn't want to tell them the truth. He didn't want to get caught and with a giant burn wound on his face, or have to explain how he got it, or why his parents hated him so much. Honestly, Izuku wasn't even sure he could explain the one outside of just being quirkless. That one outside of just being quirkless. That day went by in a relentless pace, though Izuku felt lonely. I've never felt that before. Really, not at home. Really. At home, sure, but he always had Katsuki's company when he left home. In his house. Now Katsuki was staring at him like he might fall apart with a strong breeze. No, there was some anger in this glare. No, not anger. The word only heard once. Resentment. The biggest word he knew, but his parents often said things similar, like disgusting, hate, dislike, and dislike. Izuku once explained that she blamed him for ruining her life, her career. She resented him. Now, Katsuki did too. Katsuki was right. He was always right. He was always. After all, it was Izuku's fault. Because he was quirkless, they couldn't become a wonder duo. Maybe that's why Katsuki was starting to distance himself recently. Now, Izuku was almost 9. There was almost no chance he would develop a quirk, even if it was a false positive. Even most of those kids got their quirks at the time of 8 or not 10. 9 or 8. 8 or 10, not 10. He had 2 years. Hopefully it came in. But Izuku honestly doubted it would. He'd accepted fate last night. When Hisashi banged his face, Bran knew another word Izuku had learned. Hisashi branded his face. Brand. Another big word Izuku learned once. Once he asked the library if Burns had another word. Normally Izuku would speak to Katsuki during the day. He'd speak to a few other classmates, but today he decided speaking hurt too much. Anytime he saw the look in Katsuki's eyes, his whole throat clamped shut, almost as possible to breathe. Maybe it would be much better if he just took up the position he'd been seeing and not hearing completely. Izuku sat down with the bright blue crayon he was using to pack up his work. It was almost time to leave. He wasn't on time, and if he wasn't on time, Izuku would put the muzzle on and run over his burn. Thankfully, it didn't hit any long way to the crosswalk at the way home. He arrived early for the first time in a long time. Izuku didn't even greet him. That was good. She didn't even come to the door when he entered. It meant he hadn't messed up. There had been a plate of food at the table. Izuku knew just how she was after Hisashi heard, and every time the kindness would end for a couple days, but Izuku would eat up while he had. Plus, he was careful. If he was careful, he might be able to extend the couple days while his wound healed. He ate and put his plate into the bin, and Izuku snuck in his room, silently disappearing for the night and following his routine. His uniform was in the laundry basket, and he changed his night clothes. Izuku settled down in his bed. He had a tablet for school research, but his parents never bothered to even look at it. since the school issued it. They were only warned once to take care of it, or he was only warned once to take care of it or he'll suffer the costs. He pulled up a new tab on the internet, started searching athletic centers. Gyms and athletic centers. Izuku knew he wanted to have hope of someday protecting himself from Hisashi and Inko. He needed to learn from somebody bigger and smarter. He found a local gym that was only a few blocks away. Next door to a learning center. Perfect. He could ask Inko if he could have extra lessons. Everybody always thought he was stupid, so maybe it would work. If he had extra lessons, his extra lessons were charity work. She'd probably buy him. So, as long as she wasn't putting on money, Inko rarely cared. The gym next door offered free community lessons in self-defense to students and teens under the age of 18. He opened out the registration tab and filled out everything. Well, almost everything. There was the last box he glanced at. Quirk. Izuku sighed. Izuku sighed, thudding his body lightly against the wall. He could lie and just put something random. They could try to test it if they didn't see any visual quirk about him. The easiest thing to say is he had an IQ quirk. Izuku was intelligent enough to get away with that. The younger kids with IQ quirks didn't often present as super geniuses until they were in their late teens. Often had accomplished learning and comprehension, which Izuku already did. At least all the online tests he didn't figure out. To figure out if he really was an idiot, like everybody said. Told him Izuku tapped IQ enhancement. IQ enhanced. It was a simple life, but effective. He could fake it easily. At his age, he didn't have to hold a register ID. He could, nobody could verify it. He also went under a fake name so that why Izuku was good at lying at 8 3/4. Perhaps so as a survival skill. At first, first class was self-defense next Monday, Tuesday, and this Tuesday was Thursday. Today was most likely the best day to try to convince Inko to let him do lessons. Extra schooling lessons was used as color. Izuku scooted out from his bed, opened his bedroom door, per the rules of the house. He was not allowed to leave his room He was not allowed to leave his room after he got home from school unless given permission. If he absolutely had to leave his room, he had to knock on his door and wait for Inko to answer him. It occurred to Izuku, standing there where his knuckles covering the door. He wasn't sure if he could speak right now. Izuku pursed his lips, then whined at the change. He went back to his door and glanced at a notepad and quickly wrote a note to his mother and going back to knocking on the door. Inko answered a few minutes. "What, child?" she said briefly, looking at Izuku. He offered the note and bowed his head. "I apologize for bothering you, Okaasan. My teacher suggested that I see extra lessons and keep me on track for school. There's a local learning center that are offering free students my age as charity." The lessons are after Mondays. Or at the school. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. May I please be allowed to attend? I can make myself useful in the future. Inko had forced grammar into him at least a couple of years ago with proper speech. Along with proper speech. She didn't want him talking like Vagbong. Vagbon. As she said, whatever that means. Izuku wrote an eloquent as he wrote as eloquently as he spoke, even if he didn't use big words, since they didn't always make sense to his young mind. Inko ran the note over and sighed, folding it into his hands and handing it back to Izuku. If the lessons are free, sure, I don't care. Let me know how late you'll be on those days. I'll adjust the schedule, because you're making yourself useful and trying to keep up with your betters. If you fail any of your classes, accept severe punishment and go back to your room. Izuku bowed low, ducked back in his room, and shut the door slowly as he slid down with a deep sigh. Step 1 accomplished. Step 2, introducing more lies. But he could manage. He really could. Izuku had been small spark of fate flustering around his chest. The fate might he actually learn to protect himself from pain, from punishment, from all the people who wanted to hurt him? Maybe he wouldn't have to feel this too much ache in his chest forever.